Good day, guys. We would like to welcome you to our webinar. We are Group 5 and we will be discussing critical literacy. This is the critical literacy webinar for EDUC110, building and enhancing new literacies across the curriculum. We'll now be presenting our PowerPoint.
So, good day, everyone. I am Raymond L. Obmerga, studying Bachelor of Secondary Education, major in English. We will now tackle what is critical literacy. Next. So, in this picture, we s- it is said that thinking outside the box is difficult for some people. Keep trying. So, in this picture, it shows that there's a two charac- there's a two characters that the other one must think outside the box. So, in order to identify what's the real content or the message. Next. So, critical literacy is the learning approach where students are expected to examine various tests to understand the relationship between language and its power. So, one of the foundational viewpoints that guides with teaching, research, and thinking. It informs all of our works and has significant impact on everything we do. From how we view the world to the tweets we put on a regular basis. It is the process of becoming conscious of one's experience with power relations, which is commonly accomplished through reading and writing, rather than being considered as a topic to be covered on a or a unit to be studied. It should be viewed as a lens, frame, or perspective for teaching throughout the day, across the curriculum, and possibly beyond. Next. 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 So, so critical literacy can be the ability to read text in a active and reflective manner in order to better understand power, inequality, and injustice in human relationships. So, the text is a way which people communicate using society's conventions. It critical literacy enabled to understand messages in the modern world through a critical lens and challenge the world power relations within those messages. And it also the te- it helps the teachers to encourage students to interrogate societal issues, etc., like poverty, access to education, equity, and equality to critique the structures that serves as norms. Next. So, critical literacy, according to the Melbourne of 2018, is a key of cognitive skill that tertiary education aims to instill in pupils. It entails questioning and examining ideas, as well as synthesizing, analyzing, and interpreting, evaluating, and responding to the materials you read or listen to.
Okay, thank you, Raymond. And for the history of critical literacy theory, in 1987, Freire and Macedo published their expansive volume on literacy and critical pedagogy. In it, in 1987, those who are critically literate can understand not only how meaning is socially constructed within text, but also the political and economic context in which those texts were created and embedded. In 1993, Lancashire and McLaren stated that literacy is more complex than the traditionally defined skills of reading and writing. They argued that such a traditional definition of literacy is ideologically aligned with particular postures of normative sociopolitical consciousness that are inherently exploitative. In this year, 1993, they stated that literacy is more complex than the traditionally defined skills of reading and writing. Rather, they argue that such a traditional definition and by contrast, critical literacy emphasized the social construction of reading, writing, and text production within political context of inequitable economic, cultural, political, and institutional structures. And the authors identified three forms of educational practice that critical literacy can take on. First is the liberal education. It is an approach on disciplinary knowledge where intellectual freedom exists and where disparate interpretations are considered, but inevitably contradiction is avoided and rational argumentation wins out. And for the second is pluralism. There is an emphasis on reading to evaluate principles that support a loose concept of tolerance. Tolerance here is aligned with a notion of diversity that is grounded on benevolence toward those who are not mainstream. And for the next is the transformative praxis. It takes the radical potential of critical literacy into direct emancipatory action in the world. Praxis is where defined through the Freirean 1970 process of naming the conditions of oppression and struggling collectively with others in a cycle of action reflection, action against such oppression. Praxis, also called political and social literacies, involves textual studies that are analyzed at the discursive level in which the texts were created and in which they are sustained. Next. The authors understood that this move might lead to such literacies being seen as potentially subversive. They forwarded a key distinction is centering on the difference between political indoctrination, and the development of a critical consciousness, or what Freire 1970 called conscientization. Next is at the turn of millennium, just before the 2001 reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, ESEA, as a controversial No Child Left Behind Act, and CLB, Junks 2000 posited four possible orientations for future approaches to critical literacy education based on different perspectives on the relationship between language and power. First is to understand how language maintains social and political forms of domination. Second, to provide access to dominant forms of language without compromising the integrity of non-dominant forms. Third, to promote the diversity which requires attention to the way that uses of language create social identities, and last, to bring a design perspective that emphasizes the need to use and select from a wide range of available cultural sign system.
Next topic is critical literacy and the arts. Critical literacy encourages students to use language to question their everyday world experience. As a method to make language arts more meaningful, critical literacy theory advocates learning about politically important topics using language arts skills. Teaching must be done in a way that empowers students to make decisions and participate in discussions that are not controlled by the teachers. Luke 2000 argues that it is the primary aims of critical literacy. Critical literacy enables the strength of critical literacy at work in the arts is demonstrated by an individual's development of artistic products and the rejection of other people's artworks. Examples. Number one, allow students to see how texts work to construct their worlds, their cultures, and their identities in powerful, often overly ideological ways, and understand how they use text as social tools in ways that allow for a reconstruction of these same worlds. Here's the examples. The Red Stone is a narrative about sailors who spend their days reading, reciting poetry, and playing music before embarking on a long journey. They then come across a lovely glowing stone, which causes them to lose all of their creative powers and transform into apes. After the captain assumes reading to them, they regain their creative talents. Students were asked what the stone symbolized in today's world. Many kids associated the stone to technologies such as iPhones and video games, while others linked it to Beyblades. This prompted a discussion over the author's message being questioned. It is true that technology is usually a bad thing. Students address how technology provides numerous advantages in today's environment, such as in healthcare and transportation. Students were instructed to represent their thoughts through sketching, role-playing, or a written response to deepen their thinking. We talk about how this problem-posing technique helps students read critically and why it's crucial to question the author's intentions while reading text after students shape their representations. Students found it meaningful to use the arts to investigate the representations. However, it's important to make sure that students have a greater conceptual knowledge of arts-based conventions so that they can communicate ideas in more aesthetic ways. Overall, combining arts-based practices and critical literacy with the correct text could provide students with powerful learning opportunities. Next, please. The arts literacies and reality are dynamically linked, and the understanding attained by critically reading aesthetic text involves perceiving the relationship between the arts, its creator, and its context. Both the practice and understanding of art forms are being critically literate and interconnectedness.
Next, critical literacy. According to Freebody and Luke, that have cited in Luke 2000, they have developed four-tiered approaches to early reading instruction that has now been widely adopted from across Australian schools. These approaches are necessary but not sufficient sets of social practices requisite for critical literacy. A recent version of the model offered the following descriptions by Freebody 1992 and Luke and Freebody from 1997. The first approach is the coding practices, which is developing resources as a code picker. We have these questions that serves as a guide that can be used to apply in these approaches. We have the how do I crack this text? How does it work? What are its patterns and conventions? How do the sounds and the marks relate singly and the combinations? The second approach is the text meaning practices, which is developing resources as a code participant. The questions that serves as a guide is how do the ideas represented in the text string together, what cultural resources can be brought to bear on the text, what are the cultural meanings and possible readings that can be constructed from this text. For the third approach, we have the programmatic practices. It is developing resources as a text user. The questions we have is how do the uses of this text shape its composition? What do I do with this text here and now? What will others do with it? And what are my options and alternatives? And for the last approach, from Freebody and Luke, we have the critical practices, which is developing resources as text analyst and critic. We have these questions like what kind of person, with what interest and values could both write and read this naively and without any problem with it? What is this text trying to do to me? In whose interest? Which positions, voices, and interests are at play? And for the last, which are silent and absent? We have number of activities that can be used to apply in the mentioned approaches. And we have
Here we have some ways in order for us to be critically literate. Here are some of the ways. We have textual analysis, can be guided by asking the learners to make their way systematically through a list of questions such as the following. So these are the questions that the reader needs to ask, or the learner needs to ask themselves in order to textually analyze what they are reading. So what is the subject or topic of this text? Why might the author have written it? Who is it written for? And how do I know that it is written for that focus group? What values does the author assume the reader holds? How does someone know that it is the same set of values that the author is assuming the reader is holding? And what knowledge does the reader need to bring to the text in order to understand it? Or the background information or background knowledge. Who would feel left out in this text and why? Who would feel that the claims made in the text clash with their own values, beliefs, or experiences? And how is the reader positioned in relation to the author? Example is as a friend, as an opponent, or as someone who needs to be persuaded, as invisible, or as someone who agrees with the author's view. So all of these questions are important in order for us to textually analyze These are needed in order. Okay, and for the next part, cars. This is originally developed for use in developing websites. We have credibility, evidence of authenticity and reliability is very important. Accuracy, information needs to be up to date, factual, detailed, exact, and comprehensive. Reasonableness involves examining the information for fairness, objectivity, and moderateness. Support, support for the writer's argument from other sources strengthens their credibility. This are just some of the, when we are browsing websites, these are just some of the pointers that we need to take a look at in order for us to be guided that the text or the website that we are reading are factual or is honest and true, in order for us to critically analyze or read what is inside of those websites. We also have text clustering. It involves confronting students with texts which obviously contradict each other. So we present students with contradicting texts or ironic texts in order for the students to know which is which. The task is to use whatever evidence they can find to try to make judgments about where the truth actually lies. Sometimes, these judgments are relatively easy. News reports, fairy tales, everyday texts are good materials for text clustering. So in this type of exercise, we give students contrasting ideas or contradicting ideas with which their task is to find out what the actual truth is in those contradicting statements. So this enables them to think critically in order to find the truth within the text. And to wrap it up, critical literacy is a vital element to teach pupils in the 21st century. This literacy is important in order for the student or the learners to develop their critical thinking skills as well. It is also a central thinking skill that involves the questioning and examination of ideas and requires one to synthesize, analyze, interpret, evaluate, and respond to the text read or listened to. This is not a simple reading of the text. It involves understanding the text, what's behind the text, what's the author's biases, what's the author's goal, why he or she wrote the text, and how do we respond to the text that we have read or listened to. Texts are always situated in fields of power, with economic, cultural, and social exchange involved. This is the important part that we need to understand as well. Text contains power. Whatever is written, whatever is read or listened to, has the power to make learners understand things. So it is always imperative that learners are critically literate for them to synthesize which of the written statements or texts are true or not, which can be used, which can be discarded, and which needs to be propagated. So that's the essence of critical literacy. It's whatever the students have learned or read, they should be able to analyze which ones are purposeful or helpful to them. So that's it. And we would like to thank you again for joining us today for our webinar. That is it for us. I would like to thank also my co-speakers, Zam Villegas, Raymond Amerga, Dario Conchada, and Princess Ignacio. This is Franco Marang, and we are Group 5 for EDUC110, building and enhancing new literacies across the curriculum. This has been the Critical Literacy webinar, and we'll catch you on the next one.